Hello again. In this podcast, I thought I would talk about a subject that I don't think I've spoken about before. I couldn't find any reference to it, which surprised me a little bit because it is an area of photography that I quite like. I don't do a lot of it, but the area that I'm talking about is macro photography. So macro is definitely a more specialized area. There's specialist gear you can get to get better results, but to me, it's important because one of the things that I like about photography, one of my aims when I take photographs is to try and show the subject, and it might be a familiar subject, but show it in a way that people haven't seen it before. And I think that's definitely true of macro. So if you're not familiar with what macro is, it's basically, you can call it extreme close-up photography, I guess, but generally what macro means, I'll talk about magnification ratio at this point. So the magnification is how big an image appears on the sensor, physically on the sensor and on the film when you shoot it. And macro is where you have a ratio of 1:1. So in other words, the size of the subject on the negative or on the sensor is actually life size. So immediately we're talking about small things, or small details anyway, of larger things. And basically anything bigger than that, so that'd be a ratio of 1:1. And anything bigger than that, say 2:1, would be known as, or is known as super macro. And that's where you're getting into, much bigger magnification. So you're starting to get into this sort of microscope type photography if you continue that much further. So for the purposes of this, I'll talk about 1:1, I'll talk about macro. And again, I think the beauty of it is that you can get in very close if you're able to do that and show something in the way that it wouldn't normally be seen. It might be, the pictures I like are insect pictures, their faces often, because you'll have an idea of what an insect's face looks like anyway from seeing it. But being able to study it close up is really good. I find that really interesting, and also more other details I wouldn't normally think of. So I'm thinking about a picture that I saw a little while ago now. It was actually of a fly's foot, and it was beautifully executed, let's say. The photography was really good. They'd used the colours to emphasise different aspects of it, and it was a kind of work of art on the one hand, but also it just showed the detail of that goes into these insects that we, not only probably try to ignore as much as possible, but might even swap from time to time. So macro photography to me definitely ticks that box of being able to present a subject and show it in a way that people would not normally see it. And that I think is one of the main attractions of it. Okay, so what are the things to think about? I'm going to just cover a few things very quickly, just to give you kind of an intro to macro if you're not, if you've never got into it, and just some thoughts if you want to try it out. And again, with photography, I'm very keen on people not buying things unless they really need them, because I think true with many things, but photography especially, it's very easy to spend a lot of money on equipment that then just sits in a drawer or in a cupboard and is rarely used. And I've done that. I'll sit my hand up. So I buy something that seems like a good idea at the time, but when I start to use it, it's actually not that useful. So macro is definitely one of those areas where you can get into that situation. So things to think about. The first one is depth of field that you're working with is going to be very, very narrow. So hopefully you know depth of field. If you don't, take my course and you'll learn all about it. But bear in mind, one of the aspects of depth of field, one of the things that drives depth of field is your distance from your subject. And if you are millimeters away, which is often the case with macro, clearly your depth of field is going to be extremely narrow. So if you're using a wide aperture, something like f5 or f2.8, something like that, so that you've got a lot of light coming in, your depth of field might be measured in millimeters or even less than a millimeter. So it can be extremely narrow. Obviously, the counter to that is to use a larger f number, so f22 or f16, something like that, to get the best depth of field you can get. So depth of field, though, is one of those things you really need to think about, perhaps even more so than in regular photography, because it really does determine what's in focus and what isn't. Now, lighting is, as always, an important area. And you may be able to use natural light, which is great. I was watching a guy doing just a video tutorial on macro, and he was shooting a leaf, and we got very close to it. But luckily, it was a sunny day. It was outside, and the sun was backlighting the leaf, and it was great because you could see all the sort of cellular structure of it. It was amazing. So do think about natural light, and obviously natural light can give you really nice colors as well. The other thing is it's the light that we use as people when we're looking at these subjects. So if you want to present a familiar subject, definitely shoot it in natural light as at least one option, because the colors will be what we're used to seeing. So it will be more familiar in that sense. And that familiarity can actually lead to a much greater impact when people look at the image. Other things you can use are things like a softbox or a diffuser. Again, depending on what you're photographing, you might be able to use a flash. The ideal flash, though, for macro is to use a ring flash. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically a ring-shaped flash unit that fits onto the front of your lens. Because if you imagine, if you've got a normal hot shoe flash and you're really close to your subject, it's questionable how useful that's likely to be. Another thought that I had while I was just kind of putting this one together was that if you're indoors, and a friend of mine did this, he had a glass table, and I forget what he was shooting, but what he decided to do was light the subject from underneath. So he had the subject on top of the table, and then underneath the table he had a light source, and he also experimented with just different coloured tissue paper over the top of the light source. So that is another way of just creating a really cool sort of studio in your home. If what you're photographing is very small, then you don't need a lot of space to do photography. Focusing, you obviously, that's going to be pretty critical because your depth of field is so narrow. You might find autofocus works. I think a lot of people use manual focus when they're using macro. I certainly do. Just allows me to see, I can see exactly where I am. Now, a tip that I read, and I've not tried this, it was for people using DSLR. It might be worth a try, particularly if you're not getting great results looking through the viewfinder. But just switch to live view, so you can use the screen on the back of the camera and use manual focus, and that gives you a view which you would expect, a pretty good view of what or what the final photograph will look like that you shoot, and then physically move forwards and backwards to change focus. So that's another approach to take. Now, you need to think about stability, you need to think about camera shake, so we're possibly looking at tripods here. So again, just find some method of stabilizing the camera. It might be resting it somewhere, it might be using a tripod, and then try not to use manual shutter release. So either use a remote or use the 3-second timer, so that once you press the shutter button, any vibrations will have gone by the time the shutter actually opens. So these are just simple things, and I've spoken about them before when I've spoken about low light photography, but definitely in this situation it's one to bear in mind. Now I'm going to talk about lenses. So there are specialized lenses. I actually have one myself, and usually they will be 50, 100 or 150 mil, so that kind of focal length. Prime lenses are, well, I would say are better to use, because prime lenses generally give you better performance, better optical performance than a zoom lens. But obviously it comes down to budget as well. And these are kind of lenses to think about. Now, having said that, these can be quite expensive. And an alternative that you have, particularly if you're just trying out macro photography and you don't have a macro lens, is to buy a thing or things called extension tubes. Now, what these basically do, they're a hollow tube. They've got your regular mount fittings on them at either end, and they allow you to basically move the lens physically away from the camera body. So the kind of distances we're talking about, that can be anything from 12 mil to 25 mil are pretty typical. Some will be different. You can get them from the original lens manufacturer. I was looking at a Canon 25 mil that just came on its own. It was only the one tube, but it was quite expensive. It was 180 euros when I looked at it, which I thought was quite a lot for something if you're just testing it out. So there are definitely cheaper alternatives, and they will usually come in sets of 3, and they can be as little as 50 euros, 40 to 50 euros. So again, optically, they're not going to make any difference in terms of putting extra glass there because there is no glass in them, but they can affect other aspects of lens performance. So one of the things to remember with these things is you can stack them. So you don't just have to use the extension tubes on their own. You can actually connect them together. What that can do, though, is a couple of things to think about. One is you'll probably lose autofocus if it's not the original manufacturer's extension tube. That's certainly a possibility. And that's probably not such a big deal because you're probably using manual focus anyway. You might start to get vignetting. So what I mean by that is that around the corners, the corners of the image start to get dark. It's because you're starting to bring the shape of the lens aperture into the image. So normally, obviously, that would be not there. So you get a clean rectangular original shot. But that can happen with extension tubes. The other thing is that you might get connection issues with the camera, and I've just seen this just reading other people's experiences, and that might be more of a problem because that can stop the camera from taking photographs, obviously. So do experiment a bit. If you can borrow some first, that's probably the ideal. If you're going to buy them, if you can get them from a shop, or even get them from a second-hand shop, I know that's getting more and more difficult these days. But just take a lens and your camera and just try them out if you can, just to make sure everything works. That's always the best way to approach buying new gear anyway. So that's a way to start. So you can buy extension tubes. If you buy a macro lens, you're probably looking about 10 times the price of the extension tube. So that's why I say if you can get something like that and try it out, it's well worthwhile. Now, getting on to the actual composition, the actual image, you're probably going to find that it's a little bit different to other photography you might be doing. So for one thing, if you do have a background, it's probably going to be very blurred. So you're going to get a bokeh effect on it, which is fine if you like that effect, but just beware that's likely what's going to happen. Secondly, in terms of kind of leading people through the image, which is how I tend to approach composition, that might be more limited, but you will have detail on the animal's face or foot, whatever it is that you're photographing. And the thing to do is just to experiment, really. Try different angles if you can. Try different lighting if you can. But as with all sorts of photography, just see what works. But you're likely to find you've got fewer options when it comes to composition. One thing you can do, by the way, because you are working with narrow depth of field, and I've already mentioned depth of field, is maybe to take multiple images at slightly different, focus slightly differently, go forward and back of where you want to go. Take several images and then stack them in post-processing. That's another method that you can use to get a better depth of field and still retain the correct exposure and all the other things. Your image quality is good, but work around a narrower depth of field. Now, when you're photographing, so again, I don't know what you might be photographing. So nature and insects are the common one. But you might also be into models of some sort, like scale models, and you might want to do really good close-up shots. A friend of mine does that with, in fact, he gave me a photo to use in the magazine when I was running it of steam engine type thing with figures in it, and that's another way of using macro. So it can help you get more creative. And as I've said, the nice thing is a lot of it you can do indoors. So it's, you can experiment, have a lot of fun with it that way. If you're working with a living subject, so an insect, then you need to Obviously, be conscious of what you're doing in relation to the animal. I'll call it that, and it might be moving, it might not. You don't want to disturb it if you can, particularly if you want to take multiple shots at the same angle. If it's plant, think about, again, time of day. Another thing to think about is, obviously with time of day, excuse me, you've got the golden hour, and you can use that to get more interesting colours. But you might have dew, and this is where things like dew can become much more significant, because if you're doing landscapes, things like that, you won't really, it doesn't have a big impact on the image. But I was getting something from my garden shed the other morning, and I just saw some dew on a leaf and ran back in and got my camera and took a photograph, as I do. So, these little things are just other things to think about. As always, a great place to get ideas is to jump online and have a look at other people's work, get ideas from that, see if you can replicate them if you really like them. So think about what it is you want to shoot, and then see what inspiration you can get, and that will give you ideas too. Okay, post-processing, all the usual stuff. You can do all the usual stuff, so colour, contrast, everything else. So post-processing is another topic, really. So I'll leave that alone for the purposes of this podcast. So I guess to dive in on the... Sorry, I just thought of something else I saw there. Diving in on the subject a bit more. Just referring to my notes. So when you think about it, when you're looking at macro subjects, probably you're thinking textures and patterns might be something that you're focusing on much more. And obviously this ties back into composition a little bit. I think colour will. But think about what it is you're showing people. You're showing them a level of detail in these subjects that they've probably never seen before, possibly never seen before anyway. So just have a think about that. And I think once you do start thinking about it, you'll find an awful lot of subjects out there you can experiment with. So it's definitely an area that could be very rewarding, I think, as a photographer. Now, I'm not going to recommend lenses here. I'm going to put some lens recommendations that I just found when I was doing a bit of research. So as always, I've got basically lenses from 5 manufacturers: so Canon, Nikon, Sony, Sigma and Tamron. Again, you might be better off with... I always prefer to buy the manufacturer's lenses. But having said that, some of the independents are very good. They're usually a lot cheaper than the manufacturers. So it really comes down to what budget you've got. But I'll pop them in the description to this podcast. When it comes to looking at lenses, the kind of things to think about are really the magnification ratio that you can get. So remember that true macro, if you want to be precise about it, is 1:1. The kind of focal lengths. So I gave a few earlier, but if you've got a longer focal length, like 90 or 100, basically it gives you a longer working distance from the subject. So depending on what it is you're actually shooting, that might be an advantage. Alternatively, if you've got a 60 or a 50 mil, they're less expensive, they're more compact. So from just a stability point of view, they might be the better option for you, but you will need to get closer. Now, image stabilization is useful if you've got it on the lens. That can definitely be a factor. It will obviously push the lens price up a little bit, but it's something to think about. And really, sharpness is another big factor. So sharpness and aperture. So you really want a good sharpness, especially in the center of the frame. And that's true for any photography that you're doing. Aperture, if you can get an f2.8 or better, that's ideally what you want, because that allows you to get as much light in as possible. Obviously, it gives you very narrow depth of field, which we've already spoken about. So these are just some things to consider, I guess, with macro. This podcast is intended as a bit of an introduction to it. If it is something you are interested in, I would first of all get clear about the kind of subjects that you want to at least start with, and maybe make the main focus of what you're doing. and if you are buying new gear, get the appropriate stuff to handle that. If you are completely new to it and you're not sure if it's for you, but it sounds interesting, then I would go down the path of getting some extension tubes and just using your existing gear and see how well it works. As I've said, if you can try it out before you buy it, that's much, much better. But often we don't have that opportunity now. And having said all of that, have fun with it, because, as I've said, I think it's a very interesting approach to photography. It can give you some very different results. And any pictures that you produce are definitely going to be, particularly if you blow them up really big, they're going to be a very interesting view of often very everyday things. And that, to me, is what photography is all about. So I hope you found that useful. I shall speak to you again in the next podcast. Bye for now. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Now, I just want to say thank you for tuning in and joining me in the Wildlife and Adventure Photography podcast. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please give me a like, a subscribe, maybe tell your friends, and by all means leave a comment. And if there is a subject you would like me to cover in the future, please let me know, and I'll be very happy to do my best. So thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next podcast. Bye for now.